Chapter 1: Whispers of the Black Mire. The Black Mire had always been a place of whispers, not the gentle sighing of wind through the reeds, nor the chirping chorus of crickets at dusk, but whispers of something else entirely. Something ancient, something malevolent, something that seeped into the very bones of anyone foolish enough to linger too long. I, Thomas Ashton, am a fool. My fascination with the mire began in childhood. Growing up in the small, unassuming town of Havenwood, nestled a few miles from its borders, the mire was the forbidden fruit, the shadowed corner of the world that drew my curious gaze. Old Man Hemlock, the town's eccentric historian and keeper of forgotten lore, fueled my obsession with his hushed tales of strange lights, vanishing travelers, and the restless dead said to wander its depths. He spoke of a primeval energy, a nexus of dark power that had existed long before Havenwood, before the settlers, before even the Native American tribes that once roamed these lands. The mire, he claimed, was a wound upon the earth, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, frayed, and constantly threatening to tear. Of course, everyone dismissed Old Man Hemlock as a senile old coot, a harmless spinner of yarns. But I saw something in his eyes when he spoke of the mire, a genuine fear that belied his whimsical pronouncements. And as I grew older, as I started venturing closer to the mire's edge, I began to understand that fear. The mire itself is a vast expanse of swampland, a seemingly endless tapestry of murky water, tangled cypress trees draped with Spanish moss, and decaying vegetation that emits a perpetual cloying stench. During the day, it's a somber, oppressive place, the air thick with humidity and the buzzing of insects. The sunlight struggles to penetrate the dense canopy, casting the mire in a perpetual twilight that seems to amplify every sound, every rustle of leaves, every splash in the water. But it is at night when the Black Mire truly comes alive. It was a night just like any other when my life took an unexpected turn. Having lived through my grandfather's death, it became clear how short this life we live really is. This prompted me to push forward an idea that has been stuck in my head for quite some time now. It was time for a research trip. The goal was to confirm or deny all the whispers about the swamp with scientific certainty. No more folklore, only raw, hard, undeniable facts. I parked my battered Jeep Cherokee on the shoulder of the old dirt road that bordered the mire, the only sound being the engine's incessant ticking cooling down and the chorus of frogs croaking in the distance. It was almost deafening. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, offered little illumination as I geared up. I was equipped with all the essential supplies: camping gear, recording equipment, a high-powered flashlight, and of course, my trusty camera. Hemlock's old tales danced in my head, making me double-check my sidearm. I chuckled at myself. The first few hours were uneventful. I followed a barely discernible trail into the mire, my boots sinking into the soft, spongy ground with each step. The air hung heavy and humid, the stench of decay intensified, and the buzzing of insects grew almost unbearable. But despite the discomfort, I felt a sense of exhilaration. I was finally doing it. I was finally venturing into the heart of the Black Mire, ready to unravel its mysteries and expose its secrets to the world. I set up camp on a small, relatively dry patch of land, a mere island amidst the watery expanse. As darkness deepened, the mire began to transform. Strange lights flickered in the distance, bobbing and weaving between the trees like mischievous spirits. The sounds intensified, the croaking of frogs mixed with the rustling of unseen creatures and the occasional, unsettling splash in the water. I pulled out my recording equipment, hoping to capture some of the mire's unique soundscape. But as I listened through my headphones, I heard something else, something that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, a product of the mire's oppressive atmosphere and old man Hemlock's tall tailies. But the whisper persisted, growing louder, more distinct, until I could almost make out words. "Leave," it seemed to say. "This place is not for you." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my initial excitement. I wanted to pack up camp and turn back, to retreat to the safety of Havenwood and forget I ever came to the mire. But my curiosity, that insatiable hunger to know, to understand, held me rooted to the spot. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled trunks of the cypress trees and the shimmering surface of the water. But there was nothing there, no sign of anyone or anything that could have been responsible for the whispers. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Show yourself." Silence. Only the croaking of frogs and the rustling of leaves answered my call. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a product of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew there was something else at play. The Black Mire was more than just a swamp. It was a living entity, a place of ancient secrets and unspeakable horrors. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the small fire I had built, my flashlight clutched tightly in my hand, listening to the whispers that grew increasingly frantic, increasingly malevolent. They spoke of pain, of suffering, of a darkness that would consume all who dared to trespass upon its domain. As dawn approached, the whispers began to fade, replaced by the chirping of birds and the first rays of sunlight that pierced through the canopy. Exhausted, terrified, but strangely exhilarated, I decided to press on. I had come to the Black Mire to unravel its mysteries, and I wouldn't leave until I had found what I was looking for, no matter the cost. I packed up my camp, extinguished the fire, and ventured deeper into the mire, following the faintest of trails that seemed to lead towards the heart of the swamp. The whispers were gone, but I knew they were still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The day wore on, slow and oppressive. The mire seemed to close in around me, the trees growing taller, the water growing deeper, the air growing thicker. I felt like I was being watched, like unseen eyes were following my every move. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the water, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was an old, dilapidated structure, barely visible amidst the dense vegetation. A shack built from decaying wood, its roof caved in, its windows boarded up. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, left to rot and decay in the heart of the Black Mire. A sign of civilization, or something far more sinister. As I approached, I heard the whispers again, louder this time, more insistent. "Turn back," they hissed. "This is where it began." Despite my fear, despite the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over me, I pressed on, drawn to the shack like a moth to a flame. I had a feeling that this was it, that this was the place where the secrets of the Black Mire were hidden, waiting to be revealed. With trembling hands, I reached out and pushed open the shack's creaking door, stepping into the darkness that lay within. And that's when I saw it. That's when I realized the true horror of the Black Mire. That's when I understood the meaning of the whispers, the reason for the disappearances, the source of the mire's ancient, malevolent power. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Abandoned Shack. The interior of the shack was a suffocating space, the air thick with the stench of mildew, decay, and something else, something indefinably foul that made my stomach churn. The meager light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows revealed a scene of utter desolation. The floorboards, warped and rotting, groaned under my weight as I took a tentative step inside. Dust motes danced in the faint light, illuminating a room that was once likely a small living space or workshop, but was now a testament to neglect and the relentless march of time. Cobwebs draped like ghostly shrouds from the low ceiling, clinging to the few remaining pieces of furniture. A rusted metal bed frame in the corner, a dilapidated wooden table covered in a thick layer of grime, and a single, empty chair that seemed to watch me with an unnerving stillness. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling away to reveal the bare, decaying wood underneath. Scrawled across the wallpaper in a hurried, frantic hand were words, words that sent a chill down my spine. "They're watching." One phrase repeated over and over, etched into the wood as if the writer was trying to hammer the words into existence. "The water, it speaks. Never look at the light." I approached the walls, my flashlight beam dancing across the cryptic messages. They were accompanied by crude drawings, stick figures with elongated limbs, distorted faces, and eyes that seemed to follow me around the room. There were also depictions of the mire itself, with its gnarled trees, murky water, and strange, flickering lights. But most disturbingly, there were images of grotesque figures, human-like but twisted, with animalistic features and eyes that burned with an unnatural hunger. A sense of oppressive dread settled upon me, a feeling that I was being watched, not just by the figures in the drawings, but by something else, something unseen, something lurking in the shadows of the shack. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent, almost as if they were emanating from the very walls themselves. "Get out," they hissed, the voices blending together into a chorus of dread, "before it finds you." I fought the urge to flee, reminding myself that I had come to the mire to uncover its secrets. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and began to systematically examine the shack. Every inch of the room, every surface, every object held the potential for a clue, a piece of the puzzle that could unravel the mystery of the Black Mire. I started with the table, carefully brushing away the layer of dust and grime. Beneath the dirt, I found a few scattered objects. A rusted knife, its blade stained a dark, almost black color, a tattered leather-bound journal, and a small, tarnished metal locket. The knife was unremarkable, but the journal was a different story. Its pages were filled with handwritten entries, the ink faded and smeared with age. I carefully opened the journal, my heart pounding in my chest. The first entry was dated several decades ago, around the time when Old Man Hemlock claimed the disappearances in the mire began. The handwriting was neat and precise, the words initially calm and collected. But as I read, the tone of the entries began to shift, becoming increasingly frantic, increasingly filled with fear. The author, a man named Silas Blackwood, described his arrival in the mire, his fascination with its mysterious energy, and his initial attempts to study its properties. He wrote of the strange lights, the unsettling sounds, and the growing sense of unease that permeated the swamp. But then, something changed. The entries began to chronicle a series of increasingly bizarre and terrifying events. Blackwood wrote of a figure he had seen in the mire, a shadowy creature that moved with unnatural speed and agility. He described it as having a human-like form but with elongated limbs, a distorted face, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. He also wrote of voices, whispers that seemed to emanate from the water, promising knowledge, power, and a connection to something greater. But always, these voices demanded a price. The entries grew increasingly paranoid, filled with accusations of being watched, of being followed, of being manipulated by forces he didn't understand. He wrote of strange rituals, of experiments, of sacrifices made in the name of the mire's dark power. His final entries were filled with terror, with pleas for help, with desperate attempts to escape the clutches of the forces that had ensnared him. As I read the last entry, a chill ran down my spine. Blackwood wrote of a final ritual, a sacrifice he was forced to make, a pact he had entered into with the darkness that dwelled within the mire. He wrote of a transformation, of a merging of his own essence with the mire's power, a process that would make him a part of something larger, something more powerful, something monstrous. "It's coming for me," he wrote in a shaky hand. "It will become me." The last words faded into an illegible scrawl, as if the author had been overtaken by the darkness he had so desperately tried to understand. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The locket in my hand began to feel heavy, almost burning. It was the last item on the table, so I picked it up. I opened it to find a picture of a woman, a beautiful woman, with dark hair and eyes that were filled with a mixture of sadness and fear. It seemed she knew something bad was about to happen to her. I was standing on a precipice, on the edge of a dark abyss. I had come to the Black Mire to seek answers, but I had found something far more terrifying. I had found proof of its malevolent power, a history of madness, sacrifice, and transformation, and I had a feeling that I was next. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, almost as if they were feeding on my fear. They surrounded me, permeating the shack, invading my mind. "Join us," they urged. "Become one of us." I tried to resist, to shut out the voices, but they were too strong, too pervasive. They clawed at my sanity, whispering of a power beyond comprehension, of a connection to something greater than myself. That's when the floorboards beneath me began to creak and groan. The temperature in the shack plummeted, and a cold, icy wind swept through the room, despite the boarded-up windows. The shadows grew deeper, darker, and the drawings on the walls seemed to writhe and twist, their eyes fixated on me. I turned to flee, to escape the suffocating darkness, but it was too late. Standing in front of me was a figure of pure terror. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form barely contained within the confines of the shack. It was gaunt, skeletal, its skin stretched taut over its bones, and its eyes burned with an unholy light. Its limbs were elongated and twisted, ending in clawed hands that dripped with a dark, viscous fluid. Its face was a grotesque mockery of a human face, with a long, snarling mouth filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature let out a sound that was neither human nor animal, a guttural growl that seemed to tear at my very soul. I immediately recognized it from the drawings on the walls, from Blackwood's journal. It was the creature he had described, the embodiment of the Mire's darkness, the product of sacrifice and transformation. My flashlight beam trembled, struggling to illuminate the creature's grotesque form. I raised my weapon, a pistol I had brought with me. This would be my last attempt, my last stand against the creature. Hopping the gun could somehow stop what was about to happen. The creature moved with terrifying speed, lunging toward me. I fired, the gunshot echoing in the confined space. The bullet struck the creature, but it didn't falter, didn't even seem to notice. It kept coming, its eyes fixed on me, its mouth wide open, ready to devour me. The creature's roar, a sound filled with hunger, filled the shack. As it lunged towards me, the pistol slipped from my grasp, falling to the ground with a clatter. I was defenseless, at its mercy. The creature's cold, skeletal hand slammed into my chest. Pain exploded through me, a searing, all-consuming agony. My vision blurred, and I felt myself being lifted off the ground. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the creature's face, contorted in a triumphant grin, its eyes burning with an unholy light. The darkness fell quickly, consuming all sensation, all thought. Chapter 3: Descent into Shadow. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Time seemed to lose all meaning, blurring into an endless void. When I finally awoke, it was to a world of muted sensations, a reality filtered through a veil of pain and confusion. I was lying on the floor of the shack, the rotting wood digging into my back. The air was thick with the same cloying stench of decay, but it was mingled with another scent, something metallic and coppery that I instinctively recognized as blood. My blood. Every muscle in my body ached, a dull, throbbing pain that radiated from my chest. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea washed over me, forcing me back down. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, trying to piece together what had happened. The creature, Silas Blackwood, the attack, it all came flooding back, a torrent of horrifying images that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I had been attacked, almost killed, but I was still alive. How? With a supreme effort, I managed to sit up, leaning against the wall for support. My vision swam but slowly began to clear. The shack was still as desolate as before, but something had changed. An oppressive, almost palpable energy permeated the air, a sense of being watched, of being surrounded by something unseen. My flashlight lay on the floor, its beam casting a weak circle of light. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. The pistol. It was still there, lying on the floor where I had dropped it. I grabbed the pistol, clutching it tightly in my hand. It offered a small measure of comfort, a tangible weapon against the unseen horrors that lurked in the shadows. But I knew it was likely useless against the creature. The bullets had barely phased it before. I slowly stood, my legs shaky and unsteady. My chest throbbed with pain, and I could feel something warm and wet seeping through my shirt. I reached down and touched my chest, my fingers coming away stained with blood. The creature had wounded me, but the wound didn't seem fatal. Yet. I took a tentative step forward, my boots crunching on the rotting floorboards. The whispers returned, softer now, almost melodic. "Welcome," they murmured. "You are one of us, now." The words sent a chill down my spine. What did they mean? One of them. Had the creature done something to me? Had it transformed me in some way? I stumbled towards the door, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness of the shack. I pushed it open and stepped out into the mire, into the relative safety of the twilight. The air was cooler outside, and the scent of decay was slightly less intense. But the oppressive atmosphere of the mire still hung heavy, the trees looming like grotesque sentinels, their shadows stretching across the water. The strange lights still flickered in the distance, bobbing and weaving between the trees like mischievous spirits. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I needed to get out of the mire, to get back to Havenwood, to find help. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The mire wouldn't let me go so easily. I turned to leave, to retrace my steps back to the trail, but something caught my eye, something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the shadows just beyond the edge of the shack was a figure. A human-like figure, but twisted, distorted, with elongated limbs, a gaunt face, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. It was the creature. It was watching me, its eyes fixed on me, its mouth curled into a mocking grin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, silently watching me, its presence a palpable threat. I raised the pistol, aiming it at the creature. But my hand was shaking so badly that I could barely hold the weapon steady. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'll shoot." The creature didn't react. It just continued to watch me, its eyes burning with an unholy light. I fired, the gunshot echoing through the mire. The bullet struck the creature, but it didn't falter. It just tilted its head slightly, as if curious. I fired again and again, emptying the magazine. Each bullet struck the creature, but it didn't even flinch. It just stood there, silently watching me, its eyes filled with a mocking amusement. I dropped the pistol, realizing the futility of my efforts. The creature was immune to bullets. It was something else, something beyond the realm of human understanding. The creature took a step forward, its clawed hands reaching out towards me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen with fear, unable to move. But then something strange happened. The creature stopped, its eyes widening in what looked like surprise. It looked down at its chest, its gaze fixed on the spot where the bullets had struck. I followed its gaze, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The bullets hadn't harmed the creature, but they had revealed something hidden beneath its gaunt skin. Beneath the surface of its flesh, the creature's body was covered in strange symbols, intricate patterns that glowed with a faint, ethereal light. The symbols were unlike anything I had ever seen before. They looked ancient, alien, as if they had been etched into the creature's flesh by some otherworldly force. As I watched, the symbols began to shift, to writhe, to rearrange themselves into new patterns. The creature let out a guttural groan, its body contorting in pain. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek, the creature collapsed to the ground, its body dissolving into a pool of black, viscous fluid. I stood there, frozen in shock, watching as the fluid seeped into the ground, leaving no trace of the creature behind. What had just happened? Had I somehow defeated it? Had the symbols been its weakness? I didn't know. All I knew was that the creature was gone and I was still alive. But the whispers remained, lingering in the air, their tone changed, almost mournful. "You have stopped it," they murmured, "but the mire remembers." I didn't understand what they meant, but I had a feeling that I would soon find out. I had survived the creature, but my ordeal was far from over. The Black Mire had claimed me, and it wouldn't let me go so easily. I turned and fled, running blindly through the swamp, desperate to escape the whispers, the shadows, and the lingering presence of the creature I had just destroyed. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I could run no more. I collapsed on the ground, exhausted and terrified, my body trembling with adrenaline. I was lost, alone and wounded in the heart of the Black Mire, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. Chapter 4: Lost in the Murk. The mire held me captive in its suffocating embrace. Disorientation became my constant companion. Every direction seemed the same, an indistinguishable expanse of murky water and gnarled, skeletal trees. The sun, a hazy disk struggling to pierce the dense canopy, offered little in the way of navigation. Time became a meaningless construct, the passage marked only by the increasing intensity of the shadows and the insidious creep of exhaustion. I pushed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to escape the horrors I had witnessed. My chest throbbed with every labored breath, the wound a constant reminder of the creature's attack. Blood still soaked through my shirt, staining my skin and leaving a trail that, in my saner moments, I knew could be a death sentence in this predator's domain. Yet I couldn't bring myself to staunch the flow. My mind had somehow made a decision that keeping track of my injuries had to be second to the goal of finding a path out of the swamp. The whispers persisted, though their tone had shifted again. They were no longer malevolent, but pleading. They seemed to be urging me forward, guiding me, but towards what end, I couldn't say. I knew, however, that I had no choice but to follow, to trust in the whispers as my only remaining guide. "Follow the water," they murmured, their voices now fainter, almost like a fading memory. "It leads to the heart." I did as instructed, wading through the murky water, following the flow of the unseen current. The water was cold and stagnant, the bottom a soft, squishy morass of decaying vegetation. Every step was a struggle, my boots sinking into the mire with each move. The air, already thick with humidity, grew heavier, and the stench of decay became almost unbearable. I began to hallucinate. The trees seemed to twist and writhe, their branches forming grotesque, skeletal figures that reached out to grasp me. The water shimmered with strange, distorted reflections, showing me glimpses of faces, both familiar and alien, that leered and beckoned. I stumbled, fell more than once, my body bruised and battered, my clothes torn and soaked. But I kept moving, driven by a primal urge to survive, to reach the unknown destination promised by the whispers. As I pushed through the thick, oppressive vegetation, I heard a new sound. It was a rhythmic thumping, a low, guttural beat that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. The thumping grew louder, closer, until it was all I could hear. It was accompanied by a chanting, a series of guttural syllables that seemed to be a language I didn't know but somehow understood. Kaja, Enghor, Uthlag. The chanting echoed through the mire, weaving itself into the whispers, creating a symphony of dread that clawed at my sanity. Driven by a morbid curiosity, a need to understand the source of the sounds, I followed them. The thumping led me deeper into the mire, towards the heart of the swamp, the place the whispers had mentioned. The vegetation began to thin, and I emerged into a small clearing, bathed in an eerie, ethereal light. In the center of the clearing was a structure, unlike anything I had seen before. It was a stone altar, ancient and weathered, covered in strange symbols and carvings. The altar was stained with a dark, viscous fluid, the same fluid I had seen when the creature dissolved. Standing around the altar were figures, shrouded in dark cloaks. They were chanting, their voices blending together to create the guttural symphony of dread that had drawn me to this place. The chanting intensified, and I could feel the energy in the air, a palpable force that seemed to press down on me, stealing my breath. As the chanting reached a crescendo, one of the figures raised their head, and the ethereal light illuminated their face. It was a woman, her features gaunt and pale, her eyes burning with an unholy light. I recognized her from the locket, the woman in the picture. The woman who looked sad and terrified. This was the woman from the journal, Silas Blackwood's wife, the woman who had been with him in the mire before the madness had set in. She raised her arms and the other figures fell silent. She turned her gaze towards me and her eyes locked with mine. I felt a jolt of terror, a wave of recognition. "You," she whispered, her voice a raspy echo, "you are the one." I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice caught in my throat. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear, unable to move or react. The woman began to chant again, her voice rising in a haunting, otherworldly melody. The other figures joined in, their voices weaving together, creating a cacophony of dread. The altar began to glow, and the air around it crackled with energy. I realized what was happening. They were performing a ritual, a dark ceremony of some kind, and I was the intended focus, the unwilling participant. The woman approached me, her eyes burning with a predatory hunger. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her touch cold and clammy. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into my flesh. "The mire demands a sacrifice," she whispered, her breath hot on my face, "and you will be the offering." She pulled me towards the altar, and the other figures parted to make way. I stumbled, trying to resist, but her grip was too strong. I was dragged towards the altar, towards the inevitable. As I drew closer, I could see the symbols on the altar more clearly. They were the same symbols I had seen on the creature, the same symbols that had seemed to be its weakness. The symbols pulsed with an eerie light, as if they were alive. I knew what was coming. I knew that I was about to be sacrificed, that I was about to be consumed by the mire's darkness. But I couldn't stop it. I was powerless at their mercy. As I was forced onto the altar, I saw a glint of metal from my hip. My knife. The last thing I had. Using what little strength I had left, I swung my arm as hard as I could, slashing the blade down the woman's arm, severing her grip on my arm. The woman screamed, the sound cutting through the chanting. Blood spurted, splattering the altar. The other figures gasped, their faces contorted with rage and surprise. I rolled off the altar, scrambling away from the figures, away from the ritual, away from the inevitable. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, back into the mire, back into the shadows. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there, I couldn't be captured. I had to escape. The figures pursued me, their chanting echoing through the swamp. I could hear their footsteps behind me, their cloaks rustling as they moved through the vegetation. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I could run no more. I stumbled, fell to the ground, and closed my eyes, praying that I could disappear into the earth, or that it would become all a bad nightmare that would end now. My last conscious thought before I hit the ground and everything went dark. Chapter 5. Under the Weight of the Mire. The darkness, once a refuge, now felt like a tangible entity, pressing in on me with an unbearable weight. When I finally regained consciousness, the world was a swirl of pain and disorientation. I lay sprawled on the cold, damp earth, the familiar stench of the mire filling my lungs. The chants, the woman's scream, the image of the altar. They all echoed in my mind, a terrifying symphony of dread. I was alone for now. The pursuit had ended, at least temporarily. But I knew they wouldn't give up. They would be hunting me, tracking me through the mire, drawn by the scent of my blood, by the whispers of the dark entity they served. I pushed myself up, every movement sending a fresh wave of agony through my body. The wound on my chest throbbed, the blood soaking through my tattered shirt. My legs were weak, my vision blurred, and I felt a growing sense of despair. I was trapped, lost, and hunted in a place where death seemed to be the only certainty. I needed to move, to find shelter, to somehow stop the bleeding. I stumbled to my feet, leaning against a gnarled cypress tree for support. The mire was a maze, a labyrinth of death. I had no map, no compass, no knowledge of the terrain. I was at the mercy of its whims. I tried to retrace my steps, hopping to find the trail I had followed into the clearing, but the mire was deceptive, its landscape constantly shifting, its paths disappearing and reappearing at will. I was lost. As I wandered, driven by a desperate need to survive, the whispers returned, fainter now, almost like a faint echo. Remember the symbols, they murmured. "The key is within." The symbols, the markings on the creature, the carvings on the altar. What was their significance? Could they somehow offer a way out? I closed my eyes, trying to recall the symbols, to visualize their intricate patterns. But my mind was a jumble of fear and confusion. It was impossible to focus, to remember. As I pondered, I felt a shift in the environment. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, and the sky, which I had not paid any mind to, began to show signs of an imminent storm. The whispers intensified, and the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. I opened my eyes, scanning the surroundings, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the shadows, barely visible through the dense vegetation, was a figure. A tall, gaunt figure, shrouded in a dark cloak. It was one of the figures from the ritual, one of the followers of the woman. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, silently watching me, its presence a palpable threat. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure began to move, slowly, deliberately, its footsteps barely audible over the rustling of leaves and the rising wind. I had to run, I had to escape. I turned and fled, pushing my way through the thick vegetation, ignoring the pain in my chest, ignoring the exhaustion that threatened to consume me. I ran blindly, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The figure pursued me, its footsteps echoing through the swamp. I could hear its heavy breathing, the rustling of its cloak as it moved through the undergrowth. I ran for what seemed like an eternity, the mire closing in around me, its shadows twisting and distorting, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. Finally, I stumbled upon something, an old, dilapidated structure, half submerged in the murky water. A small wooden cabin, barely larger than a shed. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't have time to analyze it. I lunged towards the cabin, desperate for shelter. I pushed open the creaking door and stumbled inside, collapsing onto the damp wooden floor. The interior of the cabin was dark and cramped. The windows were boarded up, and the only light came from the cracks in the walls and roof. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and decay. I lay there, panting, trying to catch my breath. The figure outside the door, I knew, was a matter of time before it realized I was in the cabin, before it broke through and came for me. I looked around the cabin, searching for a weapon, for anything I could use to defend myself. The cabin was empty. I heard a creaking sound and my blood turned cold. It was the door. It was slowly opening. I scrambled to my feet, pressing myself against the far wall, the shadows engulfing me. The figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. It paused, its head tilted slightly, as if listening. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't see me, that it wouldn't know I was there. The figure took a step inside, its cloak rustling. I could see its face now, the gaunt features, the burning eyes. It was the woman. The woman looked around the cabin, her gaze sweeping across the room. Her eyes lingered on the floor, on the damp wood, on the shadows. She saw me. Our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of terror. She smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "I knew you would come," she whispered, her voice a raspy echo. The mire always claims its own. I knew I was doomed. I was trapped, cornered, and there was nowhere to run. The woman raised her hand, and her fingers began to glow with a strange, ethereal light. She was going to kill me, to finish what she had started. But as she reached for me, something happened. The cabin began to shake, the walls creaking, the roof groaning. The earth trembled, and the water around the cabin began to churn and swirl. The woman paused, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked up at the roof, at the sky, at the world around us, and she seemed confused. Something was happening that she hadn't anticipated. The storm had arrived. Chapter 6: Tempest in the Black Mire. The storm unleashed its fury upon the Black Mire. The wind howled, tearing through the dense canopy, whipping the rain into a frenzy. Thunder boomed, echoing across the swamp, followed by the blinding flashes of lightning that illuminated the cabin in stark, fleeting bursts. The structure itself groaned and shuddered, threatening to collapse under the onslaught of the elements. The woman, momentarily distracted, seemed to forget about me. She stood frozen, her head tilted back, as if listening to the tempest's roar. Her eyes, still burning with an unholy light, darted around the cabin, her features etched with a mixture of confusion and fear. I seized the opportunity. I had to escape, to use the chaos to my advantage. I pushed past the woman, knocking her off balance with a desperate shove. She stumbled backward, her face contorted in a moment of surprise. I dashed out of the cabin and into the storm, the rain instantly soaking me to the bone. The mire was transformed, the familiar landscape obscured by the driving rain and the howling wind. The trees swayed violently, their branches thrashing like skeletal arms. The water, whipped into a frenzy, surged around me, threatening to drag me under. The woman, recovered from my assault, emerged from the cabin, her dark cloak billowing in the wind. She raised her arms to the sky as if embracing the storm, and began to chant, her voice barely audible above the din. I had to get away, to put as much distance between us as possible. I plunged forward, wading through the churning water, fighting against the wind and rain, trying to maintain my balance in the treacherous terrain. The storm raged, the world around me a swirling vortex of wind, rain, and darkness. I lost all sense of direction, stumbling blindly through the swamp, guided only by the faint, intermittent flashes of lightning. As I fought the storm, I noticed a change in the whispers. They were no longer urging me forward. They were silent, perhaps drowned out by the storm, or perhaps gone. The silence was unsettling, adding another layer of fear to the chaos. Without the whispers to guide me, I was truly lost. I stumbled upon a small, elevated patch of land, a relatively dry spot that offered a momentary respite from the churning water. I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and disoriented, my body shivering uncontrollably in the cold. The storm continued to rage, the wind and rain battering me with relentless force. I huddled there, trying to protect myself from the elements, listening to the thunder and the howling wind, praying for the storm to end. I closed my eyes, trying to find a moment of peace amidst the chaos. But the image of the woman, Her burning eyes, her cold, clammy touch, filled my mind. I knew she would come after me, that she would hunt me down, no matter how long it took. As the storm continued, I had another thought. It felt like a sign, a message from Old Man Hemlock that has been stuck in my head since I read his journals. His writing style was more akin to that of a poet, rather than a historical researcher. He wrote about the power of the Mire's storms, about how they could clear the air, making the world visible again. I knew what I had to do. I opened my eyes and started moving. Despite the storm's insistence to the contrary, I could not get caught in a storm again without at least trying something new. The storm provided a way to change what was going on, so I had to use it. I started to try to recognize what was around me. The lightning flashes revealed a small collection of cypress trees, enough to get some cover. I started heading in that direction. I knew I was risking my life more than ever, but at least my death would be somewhat peaceful if I were under those trees. Once I got there, I was surprised at what I saw. It was an old, weathered sign, barely legible beneath the layers of moss and grime. I took a moment to clean the sign as best as I could. What was written was simple but powerful: the Mire's heart. The words sent a jolt through me. The heart. The whispers had mentioned the heart. The water leads to the heart. Was this a clue, a sign? I looked around, trying to determine which direction the sign was pointing, where it was trying to send me. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and I saw something. A faint trail, barely visible through the rain and the undergrowth, leading away from the sign. I got on all fours and traced the trail to see where it was heading. My hope was this would be a pathway, an exit out of this place. The trail seemed to be leading me into the heart of the storm, towards the source of the howling wind and the driving rain. Despite the danger, I had no choice but to follow. I started moving, following the faint trail, my body battered by the wind and rain. I was soaked, chilled, and exhausted, but I kept going, driven by a desperate hope, by the faint possibility of escape. As I moved, the storm seemed to intensify, as if it were trying to test me, to break my will. The wind howled, the rain lashed, and the thunder roared. I fought the elements, pushing through the driving rain, stumbling over roots and fallen branches, my vision blurred by the water streaming down my face. Suddenly, the trail led me to the edge of a vast, open expanse of water. A lake, or perhaps a large pond, its surface churned by the storm. The air around the lake seemed to crackle with energy, and the lightning flashed with an unnatural intensity. Across the lake I saw something, a structure silhouetted against the stormy sky. It was a building, a large, imposing structure, its details obscured by the rain and the distance. I knew what it was. It was the Mire's heart, the place the whispers had mentioned, the place the trail was leading me, the place where I needed to go. The challenge now was getting to the other side. I started looking around and spotted something that could help me. A small, dilapidated boat tied to a rotting wooden pier. I plunged into the freezing water, pushing through the wind and rain, struggling against the powerful current. The water was icy, and the cold pierced through my soaked clothes, sending a shock of pain through my body. I reached the boat, climbed in, and grabbed the oars. The oars were heavy, the boat was unstable, and the storm raged around me. I started rowing, battling the wind and the waves, fighting to make progress across the lake. The lake felt as if it would tip over at any second. The journey was treacherous, but the pull of my goal was stronger than any fear I had. My heart beat wildly in my chest. As I made my way across the lake, the storm began to shift, its focus changed, and the rain gradually turned into a slow, steady stream. The wind died down and the thunder began to fade. The sky, once a swirling mass of gray, started to clear. I finally reached the other side of the lake and stumbled onto the muddy shore. I climbed out of the boat, my body shivering, my legs shaky. The building stood before me, imposing and silent, its secrets waiting to be revealed. I had made it. I had reached the Mire's heart. But what awaited me there I couldn't know. Only darkness and the whispers of the Black Mire. Chapter 7. The House on the Lake. The building that rose before me was a mansion, a relic of a bygone era, its grandeur now marred by the ravages of time and neglect. It stood alone on a slight rise, overlooking the lake, a silent sentinel in the heart of the Black Mire. The storm, though abated, had left the mansion glistening, the rain-soaked stone reflecting the pale light of the emerging dawn. Its architecture was a curious blend of styles, a chaotic fusion of Victorian and Gothic elements, suggesting a construction born of eccentric tastes or perhaps a dark and twisted history. The windows, numerous and varied in size and shape, were mostly dark, giving the house an appearance of countless, watchful eyes. Some were broken, revealing gaping holes that seemed to exhale a silent breath of the Mire's damp air. The front entrance, a heavy oak door framed by an ornate archway, was partially ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness within. As I stood before it, the whispers returned, faint at first, then growing stronger, pulling me toward the open doorway. "Enter," they urged. "The truth awaits." Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming for me to turn and flee, I approached the door. I pushed it open, revealing a vast entrance hall shrouded in shadow. The air inside was cold, stagnant, and heavy with the smell of dust, decay, and something else, something faintly metallic, like the scent of old blood. The floorboards creaked ominously under my weight as I took a tentative step inside. The hall was cavernous, the ceiling high and vaulted, lost in the darkness above. A grand staircase, its banister carved with grotesque figures, swept upwards, disappearing into the gloom of the upper floors. As I stepped inside, the door swung shut behind me with a resounding thud, plunging the hall into near darkness. My heart leaped into my throat. I was trapped. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking. I turned it on, its beam cutting through the gloom, revealing the details of the hall. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their eyes seeming to follow my every move. Suits of armor stood sentinel at intervals, their visors reflecting the pale light in an unnerving way. I took a step deeper into the house, moving with a slow, cautious pace, my flashlight beam dancing across the ornate furnishings. Antique furniture draped in white sheets, cobweb-covered chandeliers, and dusty tapestries depicting scenes of violence and despair. The house felt alive, its atmosphere charged with a palpable sense of dread. The whispers intensified, weaving their way into my thoughts, creating a growing confusion in my mind. "Follow the path," they murmured, "to the source of the darkness." I didn't know what the path was, where it led, but I had no choice but to follow. I had to find answers, to uncover the secrets of this place. I started moving through the house, my flashlight beam guiding my way. I explored the various rooms on the ground floor. A grand dining room with a long, dusty table set for a long-forgotten meal. A library filled with decaying books, their pages filled with strange and disturbing tales. A drawing room with a crackling fireplace, the hearth filled with cold ashes. Each room was filled with echoes of the past, with the ghosts of those who had once lived there. I could almost feel their presence, hear their whispers, sense their suffering. In the library, I found more of Silas Blackwood's journals. The journals, filled with his increasingly frantic handwriting, detailed his obsession with the mire, his fascination with the house, and his growing paranoia. He wrote of strange experiments conducted in the house, of sacrifices, of a ritual to open a gateway to another dimension. The journal entries stopped abruptly, leaving me with only a sense of foreboding. As I explored, I began to notice a pattern. Each room seemed to be connected by a series of hidden passages and secret doorways. The house was designed to be a labyrinth, a place where the secrets were hidden, the paths convoluted. The whispers intensified, their tone becoming more insistent, almost demanding. "Find the chamber," they urged, "where the darkness resides." I followed their direction, searching for the chamber. I moved through the house, exploring the hidden passages, opening the secret doorways, following the winding paths. As I moved, I heard new sounds, new clues of where I was heading. The sounds of a heartbeat, slow and steady, growing louder with each step. I could feel it in my chest, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to sync with my own pulse. I finally came to a secret doorway, hidden behind a tapestry in the drawing room. I pushed it open and stepped into a long, dark hallway. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each one numbered. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and damp earth. I followed the hall, listening to the steady heartbeat, which guided me towards a single, unnumbered door at the end of the hallway. I placed my hand on the door, feeling the slow, rhythmic thumping resonating through the wood. I had found it, the chamber, but what awaited me behind the door I couldn't begin to imagine. The whispers were now a chorus, a crescendo of urging words. "Open the door," they chanted, "and claim your destiny." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever horrors lay within. I reached for the handle, grasped it tightly, and opened the door. The scene that greeted me was unlike anything I had ever seen, a fusion of the beautiful and the horrifying, of the sublime and the grotesque. It was a circular chamber, bathed in an eerie, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting the light, creating an illusion of infinite space. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular pool of water, its surface as smooth as glass. The water was clear, but it seemed to have a strange, iridescent quality, as if it were alive. And in the center of the pool, attached by chains, was a heart, a human heart, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. The source of the heartbeat. I stared at the heart, transfixed, horrified, yet strangely fascinated. It was a masterpiece of macabre art, a symbol of the darkness that permeated this place. As I stood there, lost in shock, the woman appeared. She emerged from the shadows, her eyes burning with an unholy light, her face twisted into a triumphant smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice a raspy echo, "to the heart of the Black Mire." I knew what had to be done. I turned and ran, but it was too late. My destiny had been decided long ago. I was meant to be a part of this place, whether I liked it or not. She raised her arms, and the chains holding the heart began to shake and glow red. The water in the pool began to swirl, creating a vortex that drew me towards it. I knew what had to be done. It was too late. The water pulled me in. Chapter 8: The Mire Within. The icy water engulfed me, stealing my breath and plunging me into a world of disorienting silence. The ethereal light of the chamber faded, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to suffocate my very being. I struggled against the relentless pull of the vortex, kicking and clawing, desperate to escape its grasp. But it was no use. The water was too strong, too insistent. I was dragged down, deeper and deeper, the pressure building in my chest, my lungs burning for air. The world around me blurred, distorted as my consciousness began to fade. But then something strange happened. As I descended, I began to see things, visions that flickered in the darkness, images that seemed to be drawn from my own memories, from my own fears. I saw Old Man Hemlock, his eyes wide with terror, his face contorted in a silent scream. I saw my childhood home consumed by flames, my parents trapped inside. I saw the creature from the mire, its gaunt face looming over me, its clawed hands reaching out to tear me apart. The visions swirled around me, tormenting me, driving me to the brink of madness. I realized that the water wasn't just water. It was something else, something more. It was a conduit, a pathway to the deepest recesses of my mind, to the fears and traumas that I had tried so hard to bury. As I descended further, the visions became more intense, more real. I began to relive my worst memories, to experience the pain and terror as if it were happening all over again. I saw my grandfather on his deathbed, barely conscious, with me having to decide whether or not to pull the plug to save his life, a decision that haunted me every single day. I saw all the mistakes I had made in my life, all the opportunities I had missed, all the people I had hurt. The weight of my past, the burden of my sins pressed down on me, crushing me beneath its weight. I felt a growing sense of despair, a conviction that I was unworthy, that I deserved to suffer, that I was meant to be consumed by the darkness. The darkness deepened and the visions began to fade. I felt myself drifting, floating in a void, my consciousness slipping away. I was dying. But then a new vision appeared. It was different from the others, not a memory, not a fear, but something else entirely. It was an image of the symbols, the intricate patterns that I had seen on the creature on the altar. The symbols pulsed with an ethereal light. their patterns shifting, changing, revealing new forms, new meanings. As I focused on the symbols, something shifted within me. A spark of hope ignited in the darkness, a flicker of defiance against the overwhelming despair. I began to understand. The symbols were not just markings, not just decorations. They were a language, a key, a way to unlock the secrets of the mire, to understand its power. I concentrated on the symbols, trying to memorize their patterns, to decipher their meanings. And as I did, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, a power that seemed to emanate from the very water around me. The water began to vibrate, to resonate with the symbols. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a faint, ethereal light. I felt myself rising, ascending through the water, drawn upwards by the power of the symbols. The visions faded, the pain subsided, and the weight of my past began to lift. I broke the surface of the water, gasping for air, my lungs burning. The chamber reappeared around me, bathed in its eerie, ethereal light. The woman was still there, standing by the pool, her face contorted in a mixture of rage and confusion. What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice trembling. "The mire, it rejects you." I didn't answer. I knew what I had to do. I had unlocked the secrets of the symbols. I understood their power, and I was ready to use them. I focused my mind on the symbols, visualizing their patterns, their meanings. I extended my hands towards the heart, channeling the energy that coursed through me. The heart began to vibrate, to resonate with the symbols, its pulsing rhythm growing faster, more intense. The chains that held it began to glow red, then white hot. The water in the pool began to churn and boil. The woman screamed, her face contorted in horror. She tried to stop me, to interfere with the ritual, but it was too late. The heart exploded, its energy unleashed in a blinding flash of light. The chamber shook, the mirrors shattered, and the walls began to crumble. The house was collapsing. The woman was thrown backward, her body slamming against the wall. She slumped to the ground, her eyes wide with terror. I stood there panting, my body trembling, the power of the symbols coursing through me. The house was collapsing around me, but I was unharmed. I was protected. As the house crumbled, the power of the mire began to dissipate. The darkness receded, the whispers faded, and the ethereal light began to dim. I knew I had to escape, to get out before the entire structure collapsed. I turned and ran, dodging falling debris, leaping over crumbling walls, making my way back to the entrance hall. The house was a maze of destruction, its passages blocked by rubble, its secrets buried beneath the ruins. But I knew the way. The symbols guided me, showing me the path to freedom. I reached the entrance hall, the door now blocked by a pile of debris. I used my strength to move the rubble, clearing a path to the outside. I stumbled out of the house and into the dawn, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the dissipating storm. The house behind me crumbled, collapsing into a pile of stone and rubble. The mire was silent, its power broken. I stood there gasping for air, my body aching, my mind reeling. I had survived. I had escaped the Black Mire, but I would never be the same. I turned and walked away, leaving the ruins of the house behind, leaving the secrets of the mire buried beneath the rubble. I had a long journey ahead of me, a journey to heal, to recover, to come to terms with what I had experienced. But I knew that I could never truly escape the Black Mire. It would always be a part of me, a shadow lurking in the depths of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that exists within us all. The whispers would always be there, a constant reminder of the power that almost consumed me. But I also knew that I had survived. I had found the strength to resist the darkness, to unlock the secrets of the symbols, to break the power of the mire. And that, I realized, was a victory worth celebrating. Chapter 9: Echoes of Havenwood. Emerging from the ruins, the dawning sun casting long shadows across the mire, I felt a strange detachment. The adrenaline had receded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness, a physical and mental exhaustion that threatened to cripple me. The vibrant greens and browns of the swamp seemed muted, the air still heavy with a lingering, metallic scent, a phantom echo of the house's destruction. I started to walk, my steps slow and unsteady, my body protesting with every movement. I had no direction, no destination other than a desperate yearning to escape the confines of the mire. The trails had vanished with the storm, the landmarks lost in the devastation, and the whispers were gone, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The journey back to Havenwood was a blur of hardship. I pushed myself onward, driven by a single, unwavering thought: to leave the Black Mire behind, to find safety and sanctuary. I navigated through the tangled undergrowth, over fallen trees, across stretches of murky water, my clothes torn, my skin scratched and bruised. The images of the house, the ritual, and the woman were burned into my memory, and my every step felt as though it was retracing a nightmare. Days bled into each other, each sunrise offering a promise of escape, each sunset a reminder of the mire's relentless embrace. I foraged for food, finding berries and roots, supplementing my meager rations with whatever I could scavenge. I drank from the water, trusting the purity of the rain. My body grew thinner, my face gaunter, my eyes haunted by the horrors I had witnessed. I finally broke free of the Black Mire after what felt like weeks, emerging onto the familiar, dusty road that led to Havenwood. The sight of the town, a cluster of modest houses and shops nestled amidst the rolling hills, filled me with a surge of relief. But as I approached Havenwood, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The town seemed different. There was a stillness in the air, a silence that was more than just the absence of sound. The streets were empty, the houses silent, the gardens overgrown. The familiar sights and sounds of Havenwood were replaced by an eerie quiet. I continued toward the center of town, passing by the houses, the shops, and the church, but not a single soul was to be seen. The doors were closed, the windows shuttered. It was as if the entire town had vanished. I reached the town square, the heart of Havenwood. The square was deserted, the fountain dry, the benches empty. The old clock tower, a familiar landmark, stood silent, its hands frozen in time. I called out, my voice echoing across the square. "Hello, is anyone there?" A silence. I shouted again, louder this time, my voice filled with desperation. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" A still silence. A wave of fear washed over me. What had happened to Havenwood? Had something terrible occurred? Was the Black Mire responsible? I decided to enter the town. The houses looked empty, like they were abandoned decades ago. I tried the doors of the general store, the post office, and the diner. They were unlocked. I went inside. The inside of the general store was a dusty, untouched time capsule. Merchandise was still on the shelves, as though the owners were just moments away from coming back. The post office was similarly preserved, with letters on tables, waiting for someone to deliver them. In the diner, coffee cups stood on tables. The seats were still down. As I took the time to survey the room, a waiter came from the back. As he got closer, I realized that it was not a person but a ghost. The images of the diner, the post office, and the general store vanished. I needed to get away. I could not stay here. I had to get back. The door to my childhood home was unlocked. The door opened just enough for me to enter. I decided I would spend the night there. I headed in. The house was just as I remembered it, the furniture in the same place, the pictures on the walls. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge. It was empty, untouched. There was no food. I heard a noise from the front door, a scratching. I took my knife, the only weapon I had, and ran toward the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw someone on the other side, an old man. I opened the door. The old man was trembling and looked distressed. He was wearing a coat, a hat, and boots. It was as if he had come from outside. "Can you help me?" the old man said, his voice shaking. "Everyone is gone." "I know," I said. "I am also looking for answers." "I can't be out here," the old man said. "It's too dangerous." "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The mire," the old man said, his voice almost a whisper. "It has taken everyone." "Taken everyone, but how?" "I don't know," the old man said. "But I know it's getting closer. We have to leave or we will be next." "Leave, but where do we go?" "Anywhere," the old man said. "Anywhere away from the mire." I needed to know more. I brought the old man inside. We talked for hours, the old man telling me about the day the disappearances began, about the strange lights that appeared in the sky, about the feeling of dread that had enveloped the town. He spoke of the whispers of the shadows and of the growing fear that had gripped Havenwood. He said that everyone was gone, taken, vanished, no explanation. He said he was the only one left. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew that I couldn't stay in Havenwood. I had to leave to find answers, to find a way to stop whatever was happening. As we talked, the old man began to behave erratically, his eyes darting around the room, his body trembling. "We need to go," he said, "now." "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his face contorted in fear. Suddenly I saw it, a shadow, a figure standing in the corner of the room just beyond the edge of my vision. It was tall, gaunt, with a dark cloak. It looked like the woman from the house or the creature from the mire. I turned, ready to flee, but the figure moved faster than thought. I turned and looked at the old man. His face was covered in blood. The figure lunged. The blade of the knife pierced his chest. I tried to fight back, but it was no use. I was weak, wounded, and exhausted. The figure was too strong, too fast. It seized me, its grip like iron, and dragged me outside. I was dragged through the streets of Havenwood, past the silent houses, past the empty shops, past the ghosts of those who had disappeared. The figure dragged me towards the edge of town, towards the Black Mire. As we moved, I saw something, a faint trail leading into the swamp. The trail looked identical to the one I had seen after the storm. The trail was the same, the one I had seen from the house. It was leading into the heart of the mire. The mire was calling. Chapter 10: The Mire's Embrace. Dragged against my will towards the mire's edge, the last vestiges of hope within me flickered and threatened to die. The figure, relentless and silent, pulled me through the eerily deserted streets of Havenwood, a macabre procession leading to an unknown but undoubtedly terrifying destination. The images of the deserted town, the spectral old man, and the horrifying woman blurred together, creating a nightmarish tapestry that tightened its grip on my sanity. The familiar scent of the mire grew stronger with each step, the cloying sweetness of decay mixing with the metallic tang of blood. My blood. I tried to resist, to dig my heels into the dirt, but the figure was too strong, its grip unyielding. As we reached the edge of the mire, I saw it. The trail, barely visible beneath the tangled vegetation, beckoning me into the darkness. It was the same trail I had followed after the storm, the same path that had led me to the heart of the swamp, to the house, to the woman, to the ritual, to the edge of oblivion. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew what awaited me in the mire. I knew what the figure intended, but I was powerless to stop it. The figure dragged me onto the trail, into the shadows of the trees. The mire closed in around me, its oppressive atmosphere suffocating my spirit. The air grew heavy, the silence deafening. The figure pulled me deeper into the swamp, following the winding path, past the gnarled trees, across the stretches of murky water. The landscape was eerily familiar, each twisted root, each rotting log a haunting reminder of my previous journey. I tried to speak, to plead for my life, but my voice caught in my throat. I was consumed by fear, by the knowledge that I was about to face something far worse than death. As we moved, I began to see things. Flickering lights in the distance, shadowy figures lurking in the trees, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. The mire was alive, its dark energy pulsating around me, drawing me closer to its heart. We finally reached a small clearing, a place that seemed oddly familiar. It was the clearing where I had encountered the ritual, where the woman and her followers had attempted to sacrifice me to the mire. The altar was still there, stained with blood, the symbols carved into its surface pulsing with an eerie light. The clearing was empty, the woman and her followers nowhere to be seen. The figure stopped, releasing its grip on my arm. I stumbled, falling to my knees before the altar. The figure stood behind me, silent, watching. I knew what it was. It was a puppet, an extension of the mire's will, a tool used to carry out its dark desires. I looked up at the figure, trying to see its face, to understand its motives. But its face was hidden beneath the dark hood of its cloak. All I could see were its eyes, burning with an unholy light. The figure raised its arms, and a voice echoed through the clearing, a voice that was both familiar and alien. "Welcome," the voice said, "back to the Black Mire." It was the woman, her voice amplified, distorted, as if it were coming from the very earth itself. I looked around the clearing, searching for her, but she was nowhere to be seen. Her voice seemed to be coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the water, from the altar itself. "The mire has been waiting," she continued, "waiting for you to return." I didn't understand. What did she mean? Why was I so important? What did the mire want from me? "You are the key," she said, "the key to unlocking the true power of the mire." The key, I remembered the whispers, the ones that had guided me to the house, to the heart, to the symbols. They had said the symbols were the key. But what did that mean? "You possess the knowledge," she said, "the knowledge of the symbols, the knowledge of the mire's heart." I realized what she meant. I had survived the mire, I had unlocked its secrets, I had learned its language. I was a conduit, a vessel for its power. "The mire needs you," she said, "to become one with it." I understood now. The mire didn't want to kill me. It wanted to merge with me, to absorb my knowledge, to use me to amplify its power. "Join us," she said, her voice growing stronger, more insistent. "Become one with the mire." I felt a surge of energy, a dark force trying to invade my mind, to control my thoughts, to steal my soul. I fought against it, trying to resist its power, but it was too strong. The figure approached me, reaching out its hand. Its touch was cold, clammy, like the touch of death. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness. I knew I couldn't fight it any longer. I was defeated. But then something happened. I remembered my grandfather and all the good things he taught me. I remembered what I wanted in my life. I wanted a family and a nice home for them to live in. My eyes opened. I focused my mind on the symbols, visualizing their patterns, their meanings. I reached out my hand, channeling the energy that coursed through me. The figure hesitated, its face contorted in confusion. It recoiled, as if burned by my touch. The woman screamed, her voice filled with rage. "No," she shrieked, "it cannot be." I rose to my feet, my body trembling, the power of the symbols coursing through me. The mire's control over me was weakening. I looked at the figure, at its burning eyes, at its twisted face. I knew what I had to do. I had to break the mire's hold on it, to free it from its dark influence. I reached out my hand, touching the figure's face. Its skin was cold, clammy, like the skin of a corpse. I closed my eyes, focusing on the symbols, channeling their energy. I poured all my will, all my determination into that touch. The figure began to shake, its body convulsing. It cried out, a sound of pain and anguish. I held on, refusing to let go, pouring more and more energy into the figure. The figure's face began to change, its features softening, becoming more human. The burning light in its eyes began to fade, replaced by a look of confusion, of fear. The woman screamed, her voice growing weaker, more desperate. "Stop," she shrieked. "You cannot destroy it." But I didn't listen. I continued to focus, to channel the energy, to break the mire's hold on the figure. Finally, the figure collapsed, its body falling to the ground. Its face was no longer twisted, no longer distorted. It was the face of a young man, his features delicate, his eyes filled with sorrow. I looked at the young man, my heart filled with pity. He was a victim, a pawn in the mire's dark game. The woman screamed again, her voice barely audible now. "Curse you," she whispered, "you have doomed us all." The clearing began to tremble, the earth shaking beneath my feet. The altar cracked, the symbols fading into darkness. The mire was collapsing. I knew I had to leave, to escape before it was too late. I turned and ran back into the swamp, back towards Havenwood, back towards freedom. I didn't know what awaited me in Havenwood. I didn't know if the town would ever return to normal. But I knew that I had to try. I had to fight for the future, for the hope of a world free from the mire's dark influence. The Black Mire may have changed me forever, but it would not break me. I would survive. I would endure. And I would find a way to heal. Chapter 11. Havenwood's Shadow. Bursting free of the mire's grasp, I stumbled onto the familiar, yet alien streets of Havenwood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deserted town, highlighting the stillness and the pervasive sense of dread. The young man, freed from the mire's control, lay motionless in the clearing, but I couldn't linger. My priority was to find a way to reverse the town's condition and prevent the mire from spreading its corruption further. I moved through Havenwood, the silence broken only by the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional unsettling creak of a shutter. The houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows staring out like vacant eyes. The streets, once bustling with life, were now empty, a testament to the town's sudden and complete abandonment. As I moved, I could hear the woman's voice, echoing in my mind, a constant taunt, a constant threat. "It is still here," the voice whispered. "Inside you, it will never let you go." I ignored the voice, focusing my mind on the task at hand. I needed to find answers, to understand what had happened to Havenwood, and to find a way to reverse the mire's dark influence. I decided to focus my search on the most prominent locations in town: the town hall, the church, and the library. Surely, one of these places would hold a clue, a piece of the puzzle that could help me understand and ultimately fix the situation. The town hall was locked, but I found a window and forced it open, entering a building filled with the musty scent of old paper and forgotten legislation. The office was a mess. I found what I was looking for: the town records. I spent hours poring over the records, looking for any clues, any anomalies, anything that might shed light on the town's disappearance. I found nothing, no clues, no explanations, nothing at all. I made my way to the church, a Gothic structure that had always been a focal point of the town. The door was unlocked and I went in. The interior of the church was dark and cold, filled with the scent of incense and old wood. The pews were empty, the altar bare. The only light came from the stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. As I began searching, I noticed something that made my blood run cold: the images on the stained glass windows. They were not the familiar scenes of the Bible. They were scenes from the mire, distorted images of the house, the creature, the ritual. I heard a sound from the back, footsteps. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing in the shadows of the altar was the figure of a hooded man. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, racing through the church out into the street. The hooded man pursued me. I ran through Havenwood, pursued by the hooded man. He was faster than I was, gaining on me with every step. He turned and tried to block my path, but I would not let him. I ran straight at him, pushing him back. We struggled for a second and he fell to the ground. I pushed him aside and continued running. I escaped the church and continued running. I needed to find the library, but the hooded man was close behind. I was getting weaker and weaker. I ran and ran. I finally reached the library and entered through a broken window, hopping for a moment of peace to understand what was going on. I locked the door behind me and pushed something heavy in front of it to make sure the hooded man could not get in. The library was a massive structure filled with countless books. The place was a true testament to the thirst for knowledge. I quickly started browsing the available data, hopping to find something that would help me. As I moved through the aisles, I heard a strange noise, a whispering sound that seemed to emanate from the books themselves. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, until I could almost make out words. The symbols, the book seemed to say, the answer is in the symbols. The symbols, the markings from the creature, from the altar, from the house. I had learned the language, I had unlocked their power. I went through a series of books related to the area. There was not much, just a brief mention here and there. It was all very generic. I started looking in the library for books on the occult, on ancient rituals, on forgotten languages. After a few hours of fruitless searching, I stumbled upon a section of the library that had been sealed off, closed off with a metal gate. It was a secret section, hidden from the public. I picked the lock and entered. The section was dedicated to the occult. It was filled with ancient texts, grimoires, and forbidden knowledge. I knew I had found something that would help me. I spent the rest of the night in the secret section, reading through the books, studying the symbols, trying to understand their meaning. I learned about the mire, about its ancient power, about the rituals that were used to control it. I found it, the answer. The ritual needed to undo the process, needed to purge the taint from Havenwood. It was a complex ritual, requiring specific ingredients, specific incantations, and a specific location. The center of the town square where the fountain once stood. As I read the description, I realized I didn't have the ingredients. I decided to head back to the main part of the library to find the required materials. After a few hours of searching, I realized I could get one of the required ingredients from my childhood home. I had no time to rest. I needed to get going right away. I ran out of the library, back into the street, back into the darkness. The hooded man was gone, but I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. I had to be quick. My home was on the edge of town. If the process did not work, if I failed to complete the ritual, I would be next. The process was complex, and there was no room for error. One wrong step, one wrong word, and the ritual would fail. I needed to be strong. I needed to be focused. I needed to fight. Chapter 12. Confronting the Shadow. Emerging from the library, armed with forbidden knowledge and a desperate hope, the oppressive atmosphere of Havenwood seemed to intensify. The shadows stretched longer, the wind whispered louder, and the silence throbbed with an unsettling tension. The image of the hooded man remained burned into my mind, a symbol of the unseen forces that had corrupted this town. I moved quickly, hugging the shadows, avoiding the open streets. My destination was my childhood home, a place that held both painful memories and a critical component for the ritual that might save Havenwood. The distance felt longer than I remembered, each step weighed down by the growing sense of urgency. As I approached my street, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure, cloaked and hunched, emerged from the shadows of a nearby house. It was the hooded man. He moved towards me, his footsteps silent, his presence a palpable threat. I knew I couldn't avoid him this time. I had to confront him to fight for my survival and for the chance to complete the ritual. I stopped steeling myself for the encounter. The hooded man drew closer, and I could see his face now, gaunt and pale, his eyes burning with a dark, unholy light. He wasn't human, not anymore. He was a puppet, a vessel for the Mire's dark will. "You cannot stop us," he said, his voice a raspy echo. "The Mire will consume everything." I didn't respond. I focused my mind on the symbols, channeling their energy, preparing for battle. The hooded man lunged, his hand raised, a gleaming knife in his grip. I dodged his attack, narrowly avoiding the blade, and retaliated with a fierce punch to his face. The blow connected, sending the hooded man staggering backward. But he recovered quickly, his eyes filled with rage. We fought a desperate struggle in the deserted street, the fate of Havenwood hanging in the balance. The hooded man was strong, fueled by the Mire's dark energy, but I was determined, driven by a desperate hope. I used my knowledge of the symbols, visualizing them in my mind, channeling their power into my attacks. I moved with a speed and agility I didn't know I possessed, dodging his attacks, landing blows of my own. The fight was brutal, exhausting, and each attack from the hooded man felt as if it was hitting me as well. I was starting to feel weaker again. I knew that if I gave the hooded man a chance, he would bring me back into the grasp of the Mire. It was not going to happen, not now, not ever. The fight continued. As the energy from the symbols surged within me, a plan started to form. I let the hooded man land a hit. I grabbed him, pulled him close. I whispered the symbols, and as I whispered, I could see him writhing in pain. As I continued, the energy started to surge out, freeing him from the Mire's grip. I pushed him away. I did not kill him because killing would do nothing. He was just a man. I turned and ran, desperate to reach my childhood home, desperate to complete the ritual. The hooded man lay motionless on the ground, his fate uncertain, his body no longer a puppet of the Mire. I reached my home, entered, and quickly gathered the ingredients I needed for the ritual. The house was a familiar space, but the weight of what I was about to do transformed it into an otherworldly location. My childhood home, my safety, was now an arena where I had to do all I could to save myself, to save all of Havenwood. I gathered what I needed and headed out. My heart was pumping. I was still feeling weak, but I had no time to think. It was now or never. The time for the final showdown was at hand. I had to fight for my life. I had to do it. Chapter 13: The Ritual's Crucible. Arriving at the town square, the heart of Havenwood, I was greeted by an eerie stillness. The once familiar space was now a haunting tableau of desolation. The fountain, now dry, was a skeletal reminder of happier times, and the surrounding buildings stood like silent witnesses to the town's tragic fate. The sun, struggling to break through the overcast sky, cast long, distorted shadows, amplifying the sense of dread. The location felt familiar, as if I had been there before. I set down the ingredients I had managed to gather for the ritual: a vial of my own blood, a sprig of the Mire's moss, a stone from the old church, and a piece of parchment. I had the incantations memorized, the words echoing in my mind, a desperate plea to banish the Mire's influence. With a deep breath I began. I prepared the area, arranging the ingredients in a precise pattern around the fountain. I had learned that the symbols meant a lot and could not be skipped. As the preparation was complete, I started the incantation, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger, filled with a desperate intensity. The words, an ancient language I had only recently learned, resonated in the air, weaving a tapestry of power. I chanted, the ritual began. The ground began to shake and the air grew heavy. A dark energy swirled around me, a palpable force, threatening to rip me apart. I held strong, focusing on the symbols, on the words, on the hope of saving Havenwood. As I continued chanting, a change began to take place. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and the fountain began to fill with water. But the water wasn't clear. It was a dark, viscous fluid, the same fluid I had seen from the creature, from the woman, from the house. It was the essence of the mire. The liquid swirled around me, drawing me closer, threatening to pull me into its depths. I fought against it, my voice rising in a crescendo of desperation. But then something happened. A bright light exploded from the sky, a blinding flash of pure energy that illuminated the town square. The light struck the fountain, striking the dark liquid. The dark liquid transformed into water, pure water. The light reached me, and then I felt something. A surge of power, a wave of energy that surged through my body, healing my wounds, restoring my strength. I felt a sensation of calm and peace. The woman's voice echoed in my mind, screaming, its power fading. "No," it cried, "you cannot." I continued the ritual, the energy of the light amplifying my voice, strengthening my resolve. The sky began to clear, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the town square. The dark liquid in the fountain vanished, replaced by clear, shimmering water. The air grew lighter, the shadows receded, and the oppressive atmosphere of the mire began to dissipate. As I finished chanting the final words, A wave of energy washed over Havenwood, cleansing the town of the Mire's influence. The houses, the shops, the streets, the very air itself seemed to vibrate with a new life. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. The buildings were still there, the streets still empty, the clock tower still silent. But something had changed. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a feeling of hope, of renewal. I waited. As I waited, the wind started blowing again. It started out light, slowly building up. It carried whispers. Then it happened. The sounds of life returned to Havenwood. The birds. The birds were back. The sounds of birds singing broke the silence. They were coming from everywhere. The sound of the birds filled the air, and their songs were a symphony of hope, a promise of a new beginning. The sounds of birds filled the air, and it was beautiful. The streets of Havenwood started filling up. People, they were walking, but their footsteps were silent. Slowly, a group of people started coming together, their faces filled with confusion, their eyes darting around. They were all in a daze, as if they had just awakened from a deep sleep. I looked at their faces, hoping to see someone I knew, but I didn't recognize anyone. All the people had their loved ones with them, smiling and hugging. And then I saw someone. A young girl was looking at me, her eyes filled with wonder. I took a step closer, and I knew that I knew her. I went over and hugged her, whispering that it was okay, that everything was all right. She was the only person I recognized. She was the daughter of one of my friends. I looked around the town square and I saw that everything had returned to normal. The clock tower started ticking again. The fountain was pouring water. Havenwood was back. But was I? I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, what I had become. I was changed forever. I had survived the mire. I had saved Havenwood. But the darkness within me, the memory of the symbols, the whispers, the house, would always remain. I knew that my life would never be the same. I was the only one, the only person that knew what happened, the only one that lived through this. The people of Havenwood were free, but I was still chained to the knowledge of the Black Mire. I turned and left. I could not stay. I had to move on. I would always watch Havenwood from afar. I said goodbye to the young girl and walked away, leaving Havenwood and its people to a new life and to the promise of a bright future. I was free to go, but the question was, what should I do? As I walked away from Havenwood, the images started replaying in my head. My grandfather's advice, the sounds of the woman, the creature, the ritual. But then I had a thought. This was not the end but the beginning. It was just the beginning. Chapter 14. The Legacy of the Mire. Stepping away from the vibrant, resurrected heart of Havenwood, a profound sense of isolation settled over me. The town, teeming with life and oblivious to the horrors it had narrowly escaped, represented a stark contrast to my own reality. I was forever marked by the Black Mire, a living testament to its dark power, burdened with knowledge that no one else could comprehend. As I walked away, I kept going back to the old man's journals. I did not realize it then, but there was so much more that he had to offer. The answer to what I was looking for was probably right there, but I was blinded by the urgency of the situation. I could remember in my head the location of the last journal he had written. I was going to have to go back. I traveled for days, driven by a singular purpose: to locate Old Man Hemlock's final journal, the one he had hidden away, hoping it would one day fall into the right hands. The journey was arduous, my body still weary from the ordeal in the mire, my mind haunted by the memories of what I had seen and done. I knew the way in my mind, but the only thing that could get me there for sure was the key. As I stumbled, I realized that I was now at the steps of the place that had caused all of this. It was time to make it end. I did not even know what to think at this point. Was I even able to make it better? Could this be fixed? Or would this all be for nothing? There were still so many what-ifs that had to be answered. I was so close to Old Man Hemlock's place, and the thing that got me there to Havenwood was still there in my mind. What to do? I arrived at the crossroads, Old Man Hemlock's house. It was quiet, nothing. What was I doing? Why was I so crazy about doing this? The answer to this question was simple. I could not let this happen again. It was not about me. Never was, never will be. If no one does the right thing, the world will always go into the wrong path. I had to keep going forward. The forest looked darker than I remembered. As I came to the location, a cabin, the front door was slightly open. "Hello," I whispered. As I said it, I heard a response. "Hello, come on in." I did not recognize that voice. I took a step into the house. All I could see was darkness. The presence was familiar, but the owner was not. I had never met him. "Who are you?" "Does it matter?" he replied. "You are here." "For what?" "The book, the final book. He said you would come back." "I have to have it." "What will you do with it?" "What I have to do." I kept going forward as I could not see anything, and he seemed like he did. As I went forward, I touched him. He was cold. "What do you want?" he said. "Just give it to me." "I do not have it. All I have is my heart and good intentions. If that is all I have, you have to trust that I am here for all the right reasons." He was silent, waiting. I did not know what was going to happen. "I know what to do. Come with me." As I replied, there were new sounds coming from a distance. It felt like a calling. "What is that?" he asked. "I do not know, but it means we must be careful. There is something coming." I tried to move forward, but I could not. I am scared. I do not know what to do anymore. All I know is this place I cannot leave. I grabbed his hand and replied, "You are not alone. I will not make you leave it." I started whispering the symbols. As I started, he started gaining strength again. The voice from the mire, it was coming closer. "What is that?" he said again. I replied, "We will find out." As I said it, the door blew open. Standing in the door was me. I was back again. "You cannot stop me," it replied. The battle that was about to happen was like nothing before. Chapter 15, Mirror Image. The sight of myself standing in the doorway, a twisted, distorted reflection consumed by the mire's darkness, sent a shockwave through me. It was a horrifying confirmation of the mire's lingering influence, a physical manifestation of the internal battle I thought I had won. The figure before me was a mockery of everything I held dear, a chilling reminder of the darkness that still lurked within. The air crackled with energy, the cabin shrinking around us, the shadows deepening, and the presence of the mire intensifying. The spectral figure beside me trembled, his eyes wide with fear, sensing the imminent danger. "You cannot stop me," the mire self said, its voice a chilling blend of my own and the woman's raspy echo. "The mire is eternal, its power is limitless." I stood my ground, trying to control my fear, focusing on the symbols, on the power that had saved me before. This was not me. This was a parasite, an imposter wearing my face. It had to be destroyed. "You are not me," I said, my voice trembling slightly but filled with resolve. "You are a lie, a corruption. I will not let you win." The mire self laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You think you can defeat me? I am you. I know your fears, your weaknesses, your desires. I am everything you are and everything you could be." It lunged, moving with a speed and ferocity that surprised me. It was stronger, faster, and more skilled than I remembered. The mire's influence had amplified my own abilities, turning them against me. I dodged the attack, narrowly avoiding its grasp, and retaliated with a punch to the face. The blow connected, but the mire self barely flinched. It grabbed my arm, its grip like iron, and threw me against the wall. Pain exploded through me, and I gasped for breath. The spectral figure cowered in the corner, unable to help, paralyzed by fear. The mire self advanced, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "It is useless to resist," it said. "The mire is a part of you now. Embrace it and become something more." I refused to surrender. I fought back, pushing myself off the wall, channeling the energy of the symbols into my attacks. I moved with a desperation born of fear and determination, dodging its blows, landing strikes of my own. But the mire self was too strong. It blocked my attacks, countered my moves, and slowly began to wear me down. I was growing weaker, my vision blurred, my body aching. The spectral figure watched, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. It was a helpless observer, a spectator to my own demise. I knew I was losing. The mire self was overwhelming me, consuming me, and I was running out of time. I realized I had to do something drastic. I had to take a risk, a gamble that could either save me or destroy me. I stopped fighting, surrendering to the mire self's assault. I let it grab me, pull me close, its face looming over mine. "Yes," it whispered, its breath hot on my face. "Give in, let the mire consume you." I closed my eyes, focusing on the symbols, on the power that lay within them. I channeled all my energy, all my will, into a single, desperate act. I kissed it. I kissed the mire self, pouring all my love, all my compassion, all my humanity into that kiss. The mire self recoiled, its face contorted in confusion. It stumbled backward, releasing its grip on me. What are you doing?" It stammered, its voice trembling. I opened my eyes, looking at it, not with hate, not with fear, but with understanding, with empathy. "I am saving you," I said. "I am saving myself." The Mire self began to change. Its face softened, its eyes lost their unholy light, and its body began to tremble. The darkness that had consumed it began to recede, replaced by a flicker of humanity. I kept my focus and whispered the chant to banish the mire. I whispered it again and again and again. I never gave up. I could not believe it. The mire was giving in. Chapter 16: The Unmaking. The kiss, a desperate act of defiance, had worked. The torrent of pure emotion, the very essence of what the Mire self had sought to destroy, shattered its foundation. The energy I poured into that embrace, the love, the understanding, had disrupted the parasitic hold, fracturing the link between it and the mire. The creature, my distorted reflection, reeled back, its features contorting in confusion, in fear, and in a dawning realization of its own nature. The malevolent glow in its eyes flickered and began to dim, replaced by a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "What have you done?" it stammered, its voice now devoid of the woman's cruel echo, replaced by a fragile, hesitant tone. "I've shown you what you truly are," I replied, my voice strained, my body aching, but my spirit strengthened by the success of my attempt. "You are not the mire. You are a reflection, a shadow, and shadows cannot exist without light." I kept whispering. The symbols began to glow again. The transformation was happening, yet the power still could be felt. I continued the incantation, the words resonating through the cabin, a counterspell designed to unravel the mire's influence. The spectral figure in the corner, a prisoner of its own fear, seemed to gain a measure of composure. The fear in its eyes transformed into a look of cautious optimism. The Mire self began to tremble, its form flickering, its features wavering like a mirage in the heat. The strength it had possessed, the speed, the invulnerability began to fade. It was becoming weak. I don't understand," it whispered, its voice barely audible. "What is happening to me?" "You are unmaking," I said, my voice filled with determination. "The mire is losing its hold on you, and soon it will lose its hold on everything." I realized that the old man was helping me. I was not alone. As the transformation continued, the air around the Mire self began to shimmer, to distort. The creature's face was twisting, bending, and losing what once gave it form. "No," it pleaded, "don't do this. I don't want to disappear." "It is the only way," I said. "You cannot exist, not anymore." Tears, real tears, began to stream down the creature's face, tears of fear and regret. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the person it could have been, a person consumed by darkness. I saw what could have been. I felt a surge of compassion, a desire to ease its suffering, to give it peace. I continued chanting. The process was almost complete. The creature was about to vanish. It said, its voice barely a whisper, "I understand." It looked at me, its eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and acceptance. It nodded, as if giving me its final blessing. As I continued chanting, and the light from the symbols grew more intense, The mire self began to dissolve, its form breaking down into shimmering particles of light. The particles swirled in the air, then dissipated, leaving nothing but the scent of ozone and the lingering echo of its final breath. The cabin, once filled with the mire's oppressive energy, became quiet. The silence now was not a threat. The light began to fade, but the sounds of the forest came back. The air was clean, the sun was finally out. I could hear the birds singing. I looked at the spectral figure. It was no longer cowering in the corner, but standing upright, its eyes shining with a newfound confidence. The figure began to change as well. The fear went away and he was growing stronger. The color came back to his face. He looked at me and smiled. He looked back at me, a look of gratitude. I knew that this was the true turning point. The last vestiges of the mire had been removed, and a new beginning was on the horizon. I knew that I had a lot of work to do. My time has come. I smiled at him and he smiled back. Then he was gone. I was alone. I had to move on, I had to heal, and I had to keep going. The end had come, but what was next? Epilogue: Dawn's promise. Stepping out of Old Man Hemlock's cabin, now cleansed of the mire's lingering influence, the air felt lighter, cleaner, imbued with a sense of possibility that had been absent for far too long. The sun, higher in the sky, cast a warm, golden glow across the forest, illuminating the path ahead. I looked back at the cabin, at the small, unassuming structure that had served as the stage for my final confrontation with the mire. It stood as a testament to the power of knowledge, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring hope for redemption. The time for dwelling on the past, for succumbing to the darkness, was over. I had faced my demons, I had survived, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I had learned a valuable lesson. As I walked away, the trees seemed to rustle with a gentle whisper, a whisper of hope, a whisper of renewal, a whisper of what to do next. Havenwood needed me. I smiled, my heart filled with a sense of purpose. As I continued on my journey to Havenwood, to finally embrace what once was lost, I knew that I would not be alone. I took one final step and vanished. The end.